Hello, 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 and welcome to. Hello, and welcome to. Hello, and welcome to Pop Cartoon Kabala, Kabala. It's so late in the year, and so late in the moon, and so late in the distance between the sun and the moon. I suffer a certain kind of dissonance when talking about the constellations because there's the lunar Hebrew one, which is what I'm, rooted in. And then there's the solar thing, which is just objectively more accurate because the sun is so important. Turns out the sun is really important. Embarrassingly enough, the sun is actually super important. And the solar calendar is just more accurate for gauging like what's going on. Like the nature of the winter solstice is to be right between Sagittarius and Capricorn, right? But in the Hebrew months, Capricorn is almost done. And I have identified very strongly, with my lunar birthday. And there's plenty of rich tradition in the world for taking the moon more seriously, including the Greeks and the Hindus. The moon's a very big deal. I don't mean to brag about the moon or anything, but the moon is a very big deal. And yet, the nature of the 12 constellation system, which is written in the heavens, is very solar and identified with the sun, and that's fine and important. Part of the, I think, narrative about the tendency described in the Sefer Yetzira that really does sound very fundamental is that they unfold in their way within time, within a year. But I think there's a different range of influence. I think that's the whole sidereal versus other theory, solar, whatever. I just want to talk about Capricorn because that's what I'm up to. In a lot of ways. I got stuck thinking about it for a while because I couldn't understand it. 9 on top of 8? Okay, fine. But then what is 10 in a 12-based system? As a kid, this is also confounding to me when they first introduced the concept of different basis systems. Some of those make sense. Binary systems, 1 or 0. Okay. I guess that's very straightforward. Base 7 systems, okay. It goes back to 1 after 8. I guess 10, we all grew up with the 10 system. It's very popular nowadays. But then what's above 10? Why is 12 somehow above 10? And the theology in the Sefer Yetzira with relation to this, I want to say it's confusing, but I think that's just because it's simple and elemental. Where there's 10 sefirot described in the Sefer Yetzira, classically, everyone knows. They are mostly directions, our initial spirit from spirit, water from spirit, fire from water, and then the 6 directions, one of which is invented by looking up, one of which is invented by looking down, one by looking to the right, one by looking to the left, one by looking forwards, and one by somehow looking back. And I think those 2 are like the second 2. Most versions, they're like the second 2. And this version, they're the second 2, right? Starts with looking one way, ends with looking all the others. Okay, fine. That's 10. But let's say as much as 3 and 7 and 12 are still bound up in these same 10. And in modern Kabbalah parlance, the resolution of the 3 and the 7 into 10 is just so convenient, right? Just so comforting. Lets people really feel like they understand, there's 3 above the head and 7 below the head. And then still, where's the 12? So the answer is weird and deep because the 12 are on the inside and above the outside. The 12 organs and the 12 constellations. And here in this version, and here a lot of versions agreed upon, is the organ associated with Capricorn, the liver, and anger. And that's a little universal, isn't it? But it's a little early in the year. Like, this is the challenge of it. Let's say Chinese winter associated with Mercury, as opposed to Chinese spring associated with Jupiter. I think Jupiter. It would make sense if it was Jupiter, wouldn't it? It makes sense in a lot of ways. I think Chinese medicine, fire is Mars. Chinese medicine, Earth. Is it Venus? I don't know. I forget. Like, I'm grounded in other systems. It's hard to ground in multiple systems. That's why numbers are nice. They theoretically are universal enough to be in between all systems. And the main, I think, discordance between the universal nature of numbers between systems is how much maybe the difference between 0 and 1. Because some systems start from 0 and some systems start from 1. And that throws off a lot of association very quickly. It occurred to me one time, even the numbers names, Won is, I think, Wotan. 2 is like Tyr. Thori is like Thor. Fori is like Phorea. I don't know who 5 and 6 are. I think they didn't have 5 and 6 because they're a separate whole system. And you'll notice this is true in a few different language. Uno is the original, all-encompassing. Dos is God, right? Deus is Zeus, right? Tres, trio. It's probably something. Quattro. It's probably something having to do with questions. Is Quattro a name for Mercury? I don't know. I don't think so. Let's just talk about what I do know, what I have in front of me. I usually look at the Bnei Yisaschar for understanding about the nature of moons, and sometimes he's more insightful than I can even sit with, and I have to like take time and cover it. Like his Hanukkah stuff covers a lot of ground, but it's very noisy with the message, because a lot of times the message is hope and faith, and sometimes those are really annoying because they get in the way of just noticing what's behind the hope and the faith. And this is part of the issue. He leaves out a lot of stuff. He like addresses a system where each moon has a tribe, and he only talks about some of them. He just skips them. I met a descendant of his who claims that it's not been censored and that it's all just him himself. Okay. I've had other friends speculate that maybe someone at some point early was like, I don't know if you should say those. Because he doesn't talk about the grasses of ER, doesn't talk about the grasses of Taurus as much as other people do, as much as like Rav Nachman does. And Rav Nachman makes it sound like a commonly known theology, the grasses of ER, of Taurus. They made it sound like everyone knows, but the Bnei Yisaschar doesn't talk about it. And Tevet, Capricorn, he includes with Kislev in like one big Hanukkah sort of thing. And he introduces them both simultaneously. And the theology there is that Hanukkah starts in Kislev, starts in Sagittarius, peaks right in the middle, and then all of Capricorn is still Hanukkah. In the same way that all of December is Christmas, right? Or even more so, that all of January is Christmas, especially if you're, Greek Orthodox or any other late celebrating denomination, 3 kings, 4 kings, like a holiday at the core of 2 different moons expresses a polarity swing. But this polarity swing is still very distinct from the next thing, right? It's not quite the end, even though it's a, solstice and a new year. The traditional Talmudic legend about why the Romans put the new year, Januar, in Capricorn, of all things, is that basically a general earned the peace and freedom of the world. by being willing to die on the sword and throwing himself on the sword in order to end the Great War between Egypt and Rome. And through his martyrdom, the Romans won, is the Talmudic tradition. And his name was Januar, and he was Solstice Kid. But that's apocryphal. Let me show you something inside. Asher Sefiro Blima Blima. We were talking about how there's 7 doubles, 7 stars in the universe, 7 days in the week, and 7 gates in the body, right? 1, 4, 6, 7. Menorah, right? Benefesh Zachar Nekeva, Sheva Kfulot, 7 doubles, Beged Kaparet. It's a 5-fold process through which these are made into the stars above, the days around, and the gates through which we perceive and experience. 7 planets, everybody knows. 7 days of the week, it's the same ones. 7 gates to the soul, okay, fine. But they all get Hebrew letters, and this is the meditative twist that makes it Kabbalah as opposed to just astrology, right? This is the moment and degree to which the letters, the Hebrew letters, are being identified and bound with the original cycles that have already been the divinities of the world pretty much everywhere. Himlich bet bechachma, crowned a bet on wisdom. Okay, fine. Kashar laketer, and crowned it a crown and created from it Shabtai, Saturn in the universe. Yom Rishon b'Shana, the first day of the week. This is an archaic system before the sun took over, The ayin yamin b'nefesh zachar nekeva, the right eye. Okay, fine. But let's recall that Capricorn is ruled by Saturn traditionally. And I've tried to talk and wonder and imagine about this. There's a process, a cooling down that the world hits. From the summer solstice until the winter solstice, it's all just cooling down a little bit. There's a sort of peak around Scorpio where the fire from the inside strikes back and reaches out and thunders. And so we're all a little sensitive in Scorpio, We're all very aware of our criticisms, is how we framed it. And I think those criticisms define our core personality for a while afterwards, The 8th gives way to the 9th. Sagittarius is sort of haunted. It's associated with dreams and Kislev and just, getting a little low and not knowing what to do with it. A certain kind of distance and a certain kind of incapacity and a certain kind of wrestling with whatever. It's all in the past. But Capricorn is not quite in the past, right? Capricorn is almost fully dipped. The difference between Capricorn and Aquarius is a vessel for holding the water. Well, water for fish to thrive in, water for like sheep and cows to nurse and drink, whatever. But the original myth of Capricorn is someone not quite sure what to do with the end of the world, with the cold and the wet, except to adapt a little, right? The great god Pan, who everyone knows is the closest thing, Alan Moore says, is the closest thing the Greeks had to a one god, to a monad, because he all encompasses everything and is just everywhere, just like nature. But then suddenly gets really scared. Typhon's going to eat the world, jumps into the water, but doesn't go all the way into the water, right? Keeps a goat head to butt out and be able to get out of the water. It has a sort of amphibious, uncommitted quality. I wouldn't call it uncommitted. That would be projecting. No. Investigating quality. Trying to find the responsibility in, and often a little whelmed from. This is why Aquarius swings so hard to surrender, I think, traditionally. Identifying with the wideness. And Saturn is the coldest, wettest one in the West. Whereas in the Chinese calendar, it's really Mercury who's the cold and the wet. And we've spoken at length about the relationship between Mercury and Saturn on the level of who's serving who and, mysteries about priorities. What they have in common is wisdom associations. But whereas Mercury is fluid wisdom, Saturn is not fluid. Saturn is rigid and offended, ruling from a very far away, alienated and cold place. And this can invite the depth out of us, the work and the responsibility. But I want to show it inside. Himli ayin baroges, crown the ayin in anger. Have you guys noticed yourselves being angry, or noticed just anything just being infuriating in ways that are hard to register or gauge sometimes? Yeah, obviously. Of course. But especially lately, I kind of had this in mind as the moon started. I found myself just getting mad about all the things, which is important. That's how you deal with things a little bit, is just be like, it's bugging me, that little taka, that little sound of the thing bothering me in the distance and in the not so distance. So I keep hoping the Bnei Yisaschar, who likes to comment on this guy a lot, opens up with some basic information and then hides until the very end, where he needs to talk about it because it is the very end of the thing. And I feel like he's nervous in the way he ends. He talks about the fast of the 10th of Tevet, which happened a while ago because Capricorn's almost over on the Hebrew calendar, you guys. Like Shvat is coming, Tu B'Shvat's coming, trees are supposed to be opening up any day now, in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, But when Tevet started, I've been using it as a filter to understand my own frustration and process in ways that are, more built on agency and noticing than, let's say, reacting and then getting caught in the trap. Because it's really great to be reactive as long as you're in no danger at all and neither is anyone else. But if you have anything you prioritize or treasure that you don't want being lost in a rage, anyone, anything, the problem with rage is that it makes us much less patient for any of those. Suddenly we don't care. And I think this is why a lot of the fast of Tevet tradition are so much about learning to care about subtle things. Notice the beginning of the destruction is in this month specifically. And it's not for nothing that the beginning of destruction was in Capricorn, talking about the destruction of the temple. Because the way Judaism relates to the global chaos cycle, instead of being about Typhon destroying the world, it's about the destruction of our temple. This may have happened historically in a very precise way, And or this is just how we talk about it. In the same way that like maybe there was a historical Hercules, but maybe those 12 tasks were made up. Or maybe they just follow a pattern, like everything follows pattern. And anything that starts to grow, like a sunflower or any of those Fibonacci sequence things, all just have this pattern, the 3, 7, and 12. I don't know. That's what they tell me. And it feels resonant as far as like personality tests. And it does make sense as far as hot and cold and seasonal things, I guess, in that sort of dumb way. But as soon as I start trying to come up with a coherent system around it, I'm philosophizing. I'm coming up with a coherent system. Then it steps off away from, just being spirituality into aspiring to be some kind of a much more coherent agenda. And that congealing itself is its own kind of tendency in season. Like, why haven't I been able to record or write about this until now? Hard to get focused when things are in the rough. And the beginning of the problem has been so much Capricorn. Not you, Capricorns, I'm saying. Well, let's see what he says. הנראה דהנה החודש הזה מיוחס לשבט דן, אשר בהם היה התחלת עבודה זרה פסל מיכה כידוע. So he squeezes a lot of theological accusations in there and assumptions. Like, for example, according to his system, the tribe of Capricorn is Dan, the serpent that rises up, Samson. A lot of Danites out there, but not a lot. Samson, he's the main one. Couple others, but not that many others. But the one he mentions here is Micha. Micha traditionally built the golden calf, or rather stole the magic that made it possible to turn the surplus gold thrown in the fire into a complete and whole speaking, dancing calf. You heard the story? The story goes, when Moses went to take Joseph's bones out of the Nile, how is he going to get them out? He was told he had to get them out, and they couldn't leave without them. But how is he going to get them out? So somehow got a hold of, using his advanced Egyptian magic, a piece of copper or bronze that he wrote, Aleh Shor, rise up, bull. And he's the bull. He's the bull dude. He is the Taurus or something. Throws the thing in, bones come out, takes the bones. Now they're in Nablus. But the little magical writing thing they left there, which is still there. So this guy Micha, who some say is actually Nevat, but in the Bible acknowledged as being from Dan. Like, it's a midrash that this happened with Micha. He's a guy we know from later on in the book of Judges. Judges 18:30, actually. In the northern kingdom, they made a competing temple against the one in Jerusalem. In the heritage of Dan. וגם על פי שנשנה במשנתנו בספר יצירה Elimelech of ayin ברוגז וצר בו, ונשואם הטבע בשנה, כן בעת הרוגז אירע לזה חודש סמך, מלך בבל וצר החומה, אשר היה סביב בדמות אות סמך, ועוד דיבר על ידיה. He has a different tradition, you guys. I read one over there. It's an ayin, which has to do with eyes. Okay, anger. But no, he's saying samech. It goes around and comes around. And the siege that destroyed the temple also started on the 10th of Tevet. He gives no other reason for the fast of the 10th of Tevet. Doesn't acknowledge the translation of the Bible as like the thing, which is very progressive of him to insist it's really more the beginning of problems that's the problem. The siege and the rage that led to the destructions just being rallied around like a ring, like a samech. And he wants to explain more. Shivenu Adonai elecha, Elecha v'nashuva Chadesh yameinu kekedem. Return me, O Lord, to you, and I'll come back. Ot he, the letter he, bebe tevat v'nashuva hikri v'loktiv. So here's a line from Lamentations where the last letter is sounded but not written. A bunch of quirks like this in the Bible where it's written one way and then read another way. Like the way it's written would be nashuv, but nashuva with a hey. Ot he b'tevat b'nashuva hikri v'loktiv. It's read and not written. Yesh lefaresh. There is to speculate. Dehena lefi zeh ha'einim misrabal peh. Now this is one of the earliest things he says about Aries. The hey that is spoken but not written is the oral tradition. The spoken and heard. Here it is. And then he says the scariest thing he can say in a lot of ways. Like, there's an idea, famous idea in the Zohar, that sins against the covenant, there's no repentance. And this is, understood traditionally by pietists a bunch of different ways to justify or try to control a lot of different ways, keep things from getting out of hand a lot of different ways. Respect for the covenant. Please don't touch yourself there. And certainly don't touch someone else there. Respect for the covenant. It's just a euphemism. But the covenant is a lot of different things, as has been discussed. There's a covenant, the main social covenant. Don't be a problem. But then there's the more intimate degree social covenant. We take things on, and then that's what we're responsible for. Across the board. We've spoken about covenant a bunch of times. It's really important. It's the foundation of all the things, our integrity, our wholeness. And he's bringing it up here. And he's bringing up a few things that are really callbacks to where he started with the whole thing, because 1 and 10 are so close, but so different, because everything's changed. And the main change is solidification. Coldness and wetness is solidification, is testing, is grounding. It's how you make the sword solid. But there's an idea in the Zohar that when you break the covenant, there is no repentance. What a scary and radical thing to say in a repentance-based way. And it's long been contested. How could it be it says that? It's one of the main proofs that the Zohar can't be taken literally, right? Because repentance is always accepted and always worth trying to do better in all the ways, Let's say you would get an innocent person in trouble and then go to jail for like 30 years. And there's nothing you can do to repay them. But you really might as well try your best. Really might as well do your best. Or who are you? But there it says that actually it's impossible. And that's impossible. So it's talked about the problem of it being impossible in Shar Kedusha of the Reishis Chachma. The Iev Shalomer Kipshito. For a long time, they've been saying this can't be true, Zohar. I know you're a holy book of prophecy and whatnot, but that can't be true the way you say it. Iev Shalomer Kipshito Dahare Kaimalan De'ein Lach Davar Shomed Mipnei Tshuva. We have a promise and a principle. His side of the covenant is that nothing can be in the way of repentance. If you want to do better, you can always just go back to trying to do better. ואמרו הזל מדרשם ילקוט הושע רמז תקלב. שוב ישראל אדוני אלוקיך נשוב דקה שמי שנה תשובה שאינה מקעת עד שם יתברך. ודרשו אפילו את כפרת בעיקר. Quotes a midrash on Hosea about this line, that the promise is a promise, that whatever you do, it's going to be okay, and you can really try to fix it and can really go back. So how can they even read this Zohar idea? Even to just, give up on everything. You can come back from anything. And this is one of the few articles of faith, I'd say, in the religion, is that if you're sorry, it's meaningful. And even if they don't forgive you, you can still be sorry. On the other hand, the Zohar is saying true things. So it must be, according to the Reshit Chachma, must be that there's tshuva and there's tshuva. Tshuva above and tshuva below. Tshuva below, you're sorry, doesn't matter. Tshuva above, you understand differently. And this is something he's been introducing us to a while. The Arizal's conception of tshuva above as understanding, as being understanding. Actions matter too. The tshuva below. Tshuva. Okay, so there's tshuva and there's tshuva. The tshuva without a hey, and the hey is its own thing, which is the living, speaking, real that we encounter. Nikra tshuva tata, tshuva tshuva hainu ha, achrona nikra Torah shebal peh. The tshuva ila'a hainu teshuv ha. Rishona imayla ubchinat Torah shebechtav. Ooh. Ki hi ofefevet al od wow ki yadua. That four-letter name of God, there's two hays. And he's saying there's two hays because there's two kinds of tshuva. Tshuva and tshuva. The second hay, the spoken one, is Torah shebal peh. And the first hay, the upper tshuva, understanding, is the written Torah. Because it jumps over the wow, jumps over the truth, jumps over whatever the wow is. I associate it with truth, the sun and the moon. Yep, jumps over that wow, as is known. Just saying you're sorry doesn't help at all if you haven't changed. And he's quoting this to the The Zohar is talking about the one that is not that. You're sorry, but you don't understand. That's helpful for a lot of things. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know you didn't speak the language. I don't understand, but it's fine that I'm sorry. But violating the covenant, the relationship, the responsibilities, you have to understand what you did wrong, or your sorry doesn't help. And part of what can come from the cold and wet is just understanding a little bit. I don't know. אבל בחינת תשובה אלא לעולם אינה אין אחד דבר שעומד בפני העין שם ראשית חכמה. But once understanding, nothing can stop understanding, and nothing can hold back the transformation that comes from understanding. So reconciles the Reshit Chachma. Al pi ze pirashnu gam kin psukei tshuva, shuva Yisrael ad Adonai Elohecha v'nashuva. Dikvar yomru Adonai Elohecha k'mo shemar la'el gam kasher le'nitinas tam amro ki b'shelet omonotech lama yeh litin tam devadei ba'im lo yichteh adam lo yitzteh tshuva. But it's a problem still. The giving of a reason of the Sefer, because why was it a problem in the first place? Ki kashalta be'avonecha lama le'litin tam devadai ba'im lo yichteh adam lo yisterech l'tshuva. Just saying that there's a different level of tshuva doesn't change the problem of saying that there is no tshuva. Because changing ways is the beginning of everything. גם כן פסוקי התשובה, שוב ישראל אלוהיך, אמרנו אלוהיך משה אמר, וגם כשנתינה, טעם לא כי שעת ולך למלא, תן טעם דוודאי בהם, לא יכתה אדם, לא יצטרך תשובה. And it doesn't explain why we have this compulsion in the first place, to make mistakes. Why would there be any kind of mistake that could be made if there wasn't something that needed to be fixed in it? Like let's say, even on the most materialistic level, let's say I walk down the street and I get hit by a car. Chas v'shalom. There should be a sign there. Why wasn't there a sign? Why was I able to walk out in the street and get hit? You know? And you could say, okay, you shouldn't have to need a sign. But what a strange thing to say. Why not just put a sign? Why haven't we broken the cycle? I think is a lot more worth saying. Why haven't we broken the abuse cycles? Why hasn't everything we've learned how to do better meant an end to the problem of somehow being wrong with each other and somehow breaking the covenant, the wrongest of wrongs? Let's say we got things wrong because we misunderstood. Okay. But let's say we just abused trust. Since when was that ever okay? And how could that ever be okay? Saying the understanding, okay, that's nice, but there's more. There's more that has to be happening. Don't worry, he's not done yet. כי כשלת בעונך ובונך, סתם עוון נקרא בשלם ממדרשים חטא הברית. The most basic things we can do wrong, right? Self-abuses, right? The most basic sort of failures and neglects are called traditionally sinning against the covenant. You know, self-abuse. You have to understand this language here. I'm going to try to decode it a little bit. Go back. Just throws it in. The 4-letter name of God with the letters of Elohim. Something more central with something more disciplined. That is to say, judgment and limits. Somehow allow for something called being overwhelmed by our habits, being overwhelmed by our incapacity to hold integrity. Ki kashalta be'avonecha. Stam avon, unspecified, generally just couldn't help but do something wrong. And a lot of, I think, the hurt we do is really just for the sake of being able to. There's like reasons for things, but then reasons for things are reasons to check in. And then there's just the need to break out of integrity that is felt so deeply and half consciously and reactively and unexaminedly anywhere we're not whole with the covenant, anywhere we're not whole with the conditions and purpose of being where we are, perish forbid, with our commitment and love for being where we are and relating to what we're relating to, because there's just a lot of pressure out there, a lot of abuse, a lot of imposition, a lot of demand, a lot of urgency. And in that, it's very easy just to become whelmed. וכשלת כי כשלת בעונך, סתם עוון נקרא בירושלמי מנושים חטא הברית, כי עוון דלילוי עין ועונן, וגמטריה ריש מם חטא, וחטא הברית נעשה בהשגחת כל רמ"ח איברים. It's the simplest word for a crime. This is an argument for the letter ayin more than samech, maybe. But it's an inversion of the oldest word for personal power. On, reshit oni, the beginning of my virility, the beginning of my capacity, on, as opposed to abon with an ayin, which is a crime. There's different kinds of crimes. Chataim, pishaim, avon includes all of them. And there's a simple one, associated with everything we just find ourselves needing to do. That's called just breaking the covenant, responsible to do something, blew it off. It's very liberating. It's very important, but it's also potentially, offensive or wasteful or hurtful. Avon is 3 letters, ayin, vav, and nun. Ayin, vav, and nun. Ayin, wow, and nun. These 3 letters, each letter is a word. And these 3 words, that is the names of the letters, ayin, 70, 10, and 50. Wow, 6 and 6. Nun, 56 and 50. In Gematria together are 348. This is how many sort of limbs and ligaments there are inside of the body traditionally, because it takes a whole body to do something wrong. To break the covenant, cross the line, you have to do it with your whole self. Your whole self fails. Your whole self collaborates and agrees and I'd just rather just do this. It's just worth it. The whole self comes along. All your limbs, all your body has to feel it. Or unfeel it, rather. וזהו שאמר לתנינתם, צריך אתה לשוב בתשובה אליו, ולא מהנה לך תשובת אתה, כי כשלת בעוונך, היינו חטא פגם הברית. And this is why the Zohar uses such strong language for masturbation, or whatever. Spilling seed, right? What's wrong with that? It's just whatever's wrong with, doing nothing, wasting time, giving away something precious, nihilism. No. Anything I do wrong that doesn't really make sense to me, why it's wrong, I'm never going to stop doing it. And they say part of why masturbation is the literal manifestation of the violation of the covenant traditionally is because it's the kind of thing that really doesn't seem wrong. On the one hand, on the other hand, actually he's relief. And on the third hand, it's not even called masturbation if it's training or in the context of just, making somebody else in the room happy, like those are all different things. Those are all different relationships to the covenant, to the sense of purpose, to the sense of commitment, to the sense of responsibility in the covenant. Very localized covenant out there, general things people are grossed out by. Don't do things that gross people out. Unless they're into it, then welcome home, I guess. על פי זה פירשנו גם כן מדרשים, זכרון לברכה. וישב ראובן ששב שקו בטענתו, אמר הקדוש ברוך הוא בן אתה פתח בתשובה תחילה חייך, שבן בנך אומר פתח בתשובה תחילה בן הושע. So this line is from Hosea, and this promise is going to Reuben, associated with Cancer, the month, is that the 4th or the 5th month in the cycle? I think it's the 5th. Because Shimon's Leo. No. Shimon's Leo before, I guess it's the 4th. That throws that theory around a little bit. Reuven is inverted with Menashe. Reuven and Shimon are inverted with Ephraim and Menashe in part of the story, but Reuven gets really into tshuva and sort of shares it with everyone. This skill, this power, you can be sorry, you can understand the problem, and you can get better. And so his descendant Hosea came up with this magical formula. We can always go back. It's also the lesson from Cain and Abel, and Judah. כאשר זה מה שאמר הקדוש ברוך הוא בן אתה פתחת בתשובה תחילה, כי עד ראובן לא היה שום בן אדם ששב בתשובה, הרי מצינו אדם ראשון וקין ששבו תשובה. What's the big deal of Reuven's tshuva that God is so impressed by? Adam, Cain, tshuva was a thing. Why is Reuven special, according to this midrash being quoted? ולפי הנ"ל יפרש היטב דיני ראובן חטא בשביל יצורי אביו בתורה, מקנא את החטא בעוון חטא בברית הכתיב דרך ראובן וישכח. So understand this deeply. Reuven traditionally messed with his bros. Moved his dad's wife's bed around because he wanted something else to happen. And so the Bible writes it down as if he actually just slept with her. That's just the language in the Bible. So traditionally, it's not quite as bad as what he did. But the Bible writes it that way anyway because it was so obnoxious. Such a violation of the covenant. Take a man's wife's bed and decide where it should be at him. It's very rude. Very frowned upon. And to do anything to fix this, had to do tshuva above. Had to understand a thing he couldn't understand, which is that his priorities couldn't be important there. Always a little hard to tell the difference between when our priorities should impose themselves generously and helpfully on a reality and when it's just not really helpful. But when in doubt, maybe watch for a second. This is part of the mystery, and part of the main way the brothers differentiated is in their relationship to process in reaction to what's happening. And similarly, the signs and the constellations have a lot to do with initial reactive relationship to whatever we're engaging. And in this way, we're all drawn to have different friends and communities according to who we can deal with and whose directions we appreciate and whose priorities we can build around. But also, had to do a re-understanding, and this is called the original tshuva, because it keeps being referred to as if Reuven did an original tshuva. It means just understanding. It really is original, because let's say you understand something. Every time you understand something, it's like for the first time. You ever been in a fight with somebody and they just wanted to forgive you, but they couldn't because you just were the same monster? Until you understood something, until you could find the thing that there was there to acknowledge and understand, And it's not easy to see because there's so much us in the way and so much clarity and so much like, well, I'm pretty sure that I didn't do anything wrong and I have the right to blah, 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 blah. I'm sure that I do. I'm sure that I do. And the more sure I am, the harder it is for me to hear you, potentially. Sometimes as sure as I am makes it easier to hear other people. Depends what kind of sure. But he was open to it. You were open to it, Reuven. And that's what's great about you, God says to Reuven. Even though in his lifetime, he doesn't necessarily understand better, he's open to it. And maybe that's so much of what the work of a Capricorn and all of our selves within change and transition is, in the cold and wet, is just to like, as much as we're reacting, as much as we're changing, as much as we're just doing what we gotta do, noticing and hearing the impact, being willing to acknowledge the impact. That is to say, understanding, right? Let's say I'm defensive of my country. It's because I don't understand the hurt my country might impose on somebody. But let's say if I'm hostile to another country, it must be that I don't understand how good and important what that country is doing is, It really depends where you are, this cycle. But understanding and acknowledging opens all the doors. And like we said before, it's the 4-letter name of God with the vowels of the Elohim name, which is judgment, which is boundaries, which is nature. Understand and sit with it, he says. There's so much we can understand better and so much we can relate better. I've heard said in the context of Christmas and Hanukkah, there's so much we have defined ourselves and our practice and our passion and our priority in opposition to the other. And sometimes it's really important for our formation of self. And yet, as soon as we understand how deep the other is and how deep what the other is doing is and how deep what the other is experiencing is, the sooner we might all understand.